guys! So I am back after my month of daily videos in October for Inktober, and I thought that as a way to ease myself back into the process of making videos, I would do something that was kind of easy, but also hopefully interesting, and a little different than what I typically do, and that is a sketchbook tour. And this will be the second sketchbook tour I have on this channel. The other was my 1-week sketchbook tour. And this one took much longer than 1 week. This took, I think, about 3.5 months. I started it in August. And typically I don't spend that long on sketchbooks, but this one is toned gray paper. And this is the Strathmore brand. And as you can see, I've sort of decorated my cover here because I thought the cover of the existing one looked kind of gross. So this is one of the stickers that I sell in my shop, and I just have some acrylic paint and collage bits, and I just generally tried to make it feel more like something I would use. So I'm just going to start flipping through the pages, and I might not spend too long on each page, but we'll see what happens. And something you will definitely see through the progression of this sketchbook is a comfort level with the toned paper. Because when I first started this sketchbook, it was the first time I had ever used toned paper instead of just white paper. And so there was very much an adjustment period of trying to figure out how exactly the medium worked. And at a certain point, you can see a transition from very structured to very loose, and that was a purposeful attempt to make my sketchbooks looser. And actually, all these pages were planning stages of one piece that I did, and there's actually a video for that final piece. Here's a face that I didn't really like, so I just stuck a post-it note over the top with some things that I wanted to start drawing. Some hand studies, a very simple portrait. And I do tend to make a lot of notes in my sketchbooks, and this is a more recent development, but I find that it's very helpful when it comes to understanding what you're trying to do with your sketchbook. And this is actually one of my favorite pages in the sketchbook. I'm really bad at shoes, so I thought, okay, I'm going to draw a whole page full of shoes. And I used markers for this, alcohol-based markers. And alcohol-based markers actually take really well to this toned paper. And the paper itself is kind of strange. I think I've talked about it in sketchbook videos in the past. But it's very weird with wet mediums, and it's also very weird with ballpoint pen. It's kind of a slick texture, so when you use certain mediums on it, it doesn't necessarily react in the best way. Here I put down a base of white acrylic and used a ballpoint pen over the top of it because I was trying to see if that would help with the whole ballpoint pen thing, because I really do enjoy using ballpoint pens in my sketchbooks. So the fact that I couldn't so much in this one was very disappointing. Here are some more faces with alcohol-based markers. And you can see just how vibrant these alcohol markers show up on this toned paper. They really pop, almost more so than they would if it was on a white paper, which I think is one of the benefits that this paper has. There's another little robot design. I really like robots and machinery, but I'm not very good at drawing it, so I knew that I wanted to spend some time working on that. Some little thumbnail sketchy landscapes, another thing I'm not that great at. Gesture sketches over here. You'll see these scattered throughout the sketchbook. Now this marks the beginning of the period where a hurricane hit Florida, where I live, and we evacuated and we went up to Ohio. So This was done in the hotel we stayed at and on little bits and pieces, and you'll see that there's definitely a roughness to these pages specifically because I was more doodling and trying to use it as stress relief. This is a good example of that. I was wanting to stress eat because I was so stressed out, and so I just drew a bunch of cupcakes instead. This is alcohol markers and colored pencils, and I've really been trying to get back into using colored pencils a bit. I think that when used on the toned paper especially, they really pop, and I started to experiment with that more as the sketchbook progressed. This was an idea I had of using line work and then using ink wash without any lines to create her hair in a more gestural type of way. And this is all still when I was in Ohio. These are some moths that I drew. There was a moment when we were up in Ohio where there was a moth that got into the house, and I decided to look up the meaning of them just to kind of play with that, because I do like the meanings of objects and the psychology behind certain colors and things like that. And moths were actually extremely relevant to how I was feeling. And it was a very strange coincidence, but I really liked it, so I drew some moths. Unfortunately, this one ran quite a bit. The brush pen that I used did not like the paper. A little thing that I did on a spare sheet of paper and just glued in. Some more faces that are mostly done in just ink. Did some 2-minute gestures. And this, I believe, was when we got back to Florida afterwards. And this was for the Draw with Jazza competition that I actually did a video for. This was a leaf that I found while we were up in Ohio because we don't have leaves like that. So I pressed it and I drew it. That was a failed pastel attempt, so I taped a piece of tracing paper over the top. Some more stuff, some charcoal, I believe. Pen on a post-it note. Shifting my paper all over the place here. Did some Swift silhouettes, and this was actually prep for Inktober that I didn't really use, but it was fun anyways. Some more gestures. This was a poppy that I had drawn, also as prep for Inktober that never happened. This was in alcohol markers, and I think you can kind of tell just by how vibrant it is in comparison to a lot of the other colors. The final piece for that contest that I did, I decided to tape it in. This was some experimentation with a pen that was not waterproof and working with that on purpose. This was actually a 3-marker challenge that I did with my sister because she wanted to do it, so I decided to go along with it. And I actually used Crayola markers and watered them down so that they appeared almost watercolor-ish. And the thing is, I taped this tracing paper over the top because it was rubbing off, because the markers are not meant to be used like that necessarily. So as you can see over here where I was doing an experiment, it definitely kind of bled onto her base, and that was when I decided to staple this tracing paper in. This was after I watched Jurassic Park for the first time ever. And that was in September, the end of September. That's the first time I ever watched Jurassic Park, and I really liked it. It was really enjoyable. I think it holds up really well, considering when it was made, and so I decided to document the occasion by drawing some dinosaurs. And I actually really like these. I think the style of them is a little bit different than what I typically do, but I really like it. Now, this page, or these pages, is where what I mentioned near the beginning of this video really starts to kick in. When I mentioned there was a transition that happened, where I went from very structured to very loose and organic. And I was sort of taking a break from my sketchbook because I was very overwhelmed by Inktober, and as you can see here, this was actually during Inktober, and I just wanted to doodle. I didn't want to stress about it. I didn't want to have to worry about it being perfect, because that was already very much how I was acting with Inktober itself. So I wanted something that I could just play and not worry. And so I started to really be experimental. I used a lot of highlighters and a new pen that I had gotten, and I was just trying to experiment. And it doesn't all turn out. I really like this. I don't so much like this. I don't really like this so much. I think the way her eyes are weird. But it's a sketchbook, and I really wanted to get over that perfectionist part of me. And here, I didn't like this so much, but I liked the idea of it, so I tried to redo it. Still not a huge fan, but I like this better than the other one. And I think that's what a sketchbook should really be about, is seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and then you can try again if you want. I don't think you have to simply leave it at that. I think you can do multiple attempts. Here, I was doing just more doodles of faces, incorporated a little bit of a body here. That didn't quite turn out the way that I wanted it to, so I just let it go, and I left it like that. And here was where I really started to experiment. Now, I've really been trying to test out stretched proportions lately, over the past month and a half or so. And here, I was using a very unrealistic head shape, and then stretching the eyes and making them very tiny. And I did this on purpose, and I think it looks sort of natural. And I actually really enjoy the look of it, even though it's very different than what I typically do. Same thing here, I was going with the same kind of style, trying to relate them to one another. Same here. This was a little bit different. I wanted to put a galaxy in her eyes, specifically. So I knew that I couldn't make the eyes this tiny, or I would never be able to see them. So I used a very similar head shape that was very unnatural and almost alien-like, and then made her eyes bigger. So just playing with the proportions and just trying to test. Again, with the same similar proportions, and these are just tests. You know, I'm still working with my typical style, but I don't think there's anything wrong about pushing outside of that boundary. If you become so caught up in saying that something's your style, then you can never come up with something like, for example, this, which I really enjoy. Now here was where I started thinking maybe I wanted to draw a little more realism, or I really wanted to look into digital painting specifically, is what brought this about. So I did some little shape studies. And this is where Inktober ended, and I started Uvember. Of course, I needed to start a new thing as soon as my once stressful thing was over. But I tried to keep the same idea of looseness that I've been applying to my sketchbooks. So this was actually day 1, and this was day 2. I got them switched around, and you can see by the date stamps. And essentially the challenge is to use a specific color for every day of the challenge. I live streamed this and actually uploaded the live stream to my YouTube channel if you wanted to see that. And I do plan on doing more live streams in the future. That one was actually over on Instagram, and I really liked the way that one worked out. This was thumbnailing for another piece I did, and that one was supposed to be a video, but I lost the footage for it. And I didn't really like the way it turned out, so I maybe will do it over and try to make it something I enjoy more and hopefully not lose the footage. More Uvember drawings. And even more. I'm trying to vary it up a little bit with the poses, but it is still very loose, and I wanted to draw people specifically. Some blind drawings over here. I was getting very near the end of the sketchbook, so I just wanted to fill up pages, and I knew that blind drawings are good for your artist's eye. And I always think it's funny how something like this is potentially more interesting than anything I could draw while looking, because I'm so perfectionistic. But this one specifically, this profile, I really, really like this a lot. And I kind of want to do something with it, but I don't know what. So if you see this making an appearance in the future, don't be surprised. Now this was also a Huevember drawing, but I'm really happy with this one, and it inspired something that maybe will be another project in the future. Who knows? I have so many ideas for future projects, and 3 or 4 that I'm currently working on, so who knows when this will be a thing. But I was drawing and doodling with the colors, and I ended up with something that I consider a interpretation of the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland. And I really like it. I think there are things that could be done better, but I do enjoy it. And I was thinking it could be fun to do a series of illustrations based around Alice in Wonderland characters, but give them kind of a Victorian flair, because that was a thematic influence I was using in Inktober and was really enjoying. So, like I said, I don't know when that would be a thing, but it was an idea that came to mind, and there's the potential for a future with it. This is actually one of my favorite Huevember drawings I've done. I really like the tattoo designs on her neck, and I was really starting to enforce some of the shading in her nose due to some studies that are coming up. And here are these studies. I didn't like how I was drawing noses. I was not a fan. And so I decided, well, I'm just going to draw a crap ton of noses. Here, not so good. Not great. This, a little better. But down here, I feel like I did start to get it eventually. This is, I think, my favorite. Though these two are also pretty good as well. And I tried to enact some of that shading on this piece. Not quite as good, just because it's an ink wash and I was a little heavy-handed with it, but something to keep in mind for the future. I definitely tried to give this girl a more striking profile. I guess that's a good word for it. I wanted it to be different. Specifically different than what I tend to draw. And the final page, which is kind of a cop-out, but I was just really ready to be done with the sketchbook. Did some gesture drawings, and you can never do too many of them, so, you know, I'm not complaining. And then, of course, the very, very last one wasn't really something that was a cop-out so much as I've been using it throughout my entire sketchbook to do swatches on, to see how things work on this specific paper in this specific color. So that's its own page, and that's the end of that sketchbook. Now, like I said, I definitely was working on this for quite a few months, and it was a little longer than I would have liked it for it to be, the amount of time I spent working on this one. But I was a little stressed out about the perfectionism in the sketchbooks, and I'm hoping to break that with my new one. It helps that the new one I've officially started and am 3 pages in as of yesterday. It has white paper, so I'm a little more familiar with it. It's less of a hurdle to get over. And it's also a smaller sketchbook. I think it only has 72 pages. So I'm hoping that the perfectionism doesn't kill me. As of right now, I'm feeling pretty good about it, and I'm pretty hyped because it's a new sketchbook. So hopefully I will be back with another sketchbook tour soon. I hope you all enjoyed this one. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.